Tēnā koutou katoa, this is Toby Manhire with a special edition of Gone by Lunchtime, the latest in our election podcasts. A big thank you to members, a big thank you to Samuel Robinson for producing. This conversation is with the Green co-leaders, Marama, Davidson and James Shaw, and they came into the studio here in Auckland and we covered quite a lot of ground. Really interesting conversation, I hope. Talked about the last 6 years, the different nature of the governments in 2017 and 2020 and the Greens' roles in those government. I was curious to know the extent to which they felt let down by the governing party in either of those terms. I asked them also about why they were focusing on particular electorates this time round and what difference this made. And also how they tried to get cut through in what's begun, particularly in the last week, a sort of vitriolic style campaign and their approach to that. What else did we talk about? We talked also about Elizabeth Kerekere. I was curious to know, having seen them in the House attending her valedictory speech, what was going through their mind. She accused them of an epic failure of leadership, as well as talking about, I guess, the sort of tricky area, which is how do we talk about in the sort of dance of bottom lines and ruling out and all that stuff. How do we talk about what their priorities are without getting just the stock talking point answer? And we touched also on what the latest is in terms of Marama Davidson being struck by a motorcycle during that Parker Posie counter-protest a couple of months ago, and their views on how to respond to anti-trans rights activists like that, the best way around it. Anyway, really interesting conversation. Hope you enjoy it. Here it is. Marama Davidson, James Shaw, Green co-leaders, tēnā kōrua.
Mōrena Toby, kia ora.
Morning.
Thank you for coming in. We're into it now. Yesterday there were gelati and robots, so you know that it's a campaign trail. There's also quite a lot of I know you are, but what am I? Or I know, yeah, you know, and attacks, your attacks are meaner than our attacks, Labour versus National, and all that noise. How do you cut through? Like, sometimes it feels as though those kind of more heat than light debates can fill up the room. How do you deal with that?
We're in the middle saying, stop that. We've got solutions, visions, values to talk about. And that's what we've been doing, well, for actually the past few months now. And that seems to be resonating really well with people, just putting up the things that are relevant to people's everyday lives, as well as the long-term thinking that people care about as well. And that's what we're focused on.
It's one of the things I have a particular personal loathing of during election campaigns is just the nonsense, the huge amounts of kind of...
Can be fun sometimes.
Well, yeah, to a point, but I just, like, the issues that we're up against, the challenges that we've got as a country and as a planet are so great. I just think people deserve more than that. So, you know, we do, as Marama said, we do try and hold the line on saying, look, can we just focus on the big long-term issue, or we will focus on, like, the others will do whatever they'll do, right? And we kind of just get on with our stuff. Every now and then, obviously, you need to kind of respond to something that somebody else has been saying, because it is just such nonsense, you know, that you have to say, hey, look, that's just incorrect.
But you've been running these kind of quite most Sundays almost, feels like, for the last couple of months, sort of doing a new launch of something, and that's obviously your campaign strategy, to kind of put stuff out there and hit those Sundays. Is that the plan?
Yeah, it is. And we've also gone earlier than we usually do during the course of an election campaign. So we actually led with the kind of biggest, highest profile, in some ways most complex policy package, which was around ending poverty, lifting incomes, tax reform, and so on. And our last one is coming up this weekend, and so then we will spend the rest of the campaign talking about the things that we've launched, and that's working for us because our polling has gone up in response to the fact that we went early on those things.
What do you think about those attack ads, those CTU attack ads, those wraparound ads on the Herald?
I mean, you've got to put them all in a category of attack ads. I have to say, as a Māori woman, a brown woman in politics, the years and years of attacks, particularly aimed at just how people are triggered just by brown woman faces being in a position of influence and power, and what I've seen directed towards Nanaia Mahuta, for example. I've got to say, like, that's been happening for years. The attacks towards Jacinda, towards women, pisses me off, actually, and is really poor behaviour that none of our country, no one in our country deserves. And so that's why we are trying to instead put our focus and our energy on inspiring people rather than putting people off voting at all, which is, I think, what happens overall when you just see attack ads from both sides, from all sides. I think people will tend to just shrug shoulders maybe and give up. And our really clear message is that's what that strategy is designed to do. And when people shrug their shoulders and give up, that keeps the status quo of wealth and power as the status quo. So we're urging people not to fall for that and to exercise their power to vote.
You're both untethered, aren't you, in this campaign? You stood in Tamaki Makaurau last time.
Totally.
You did quite well. You got 20% of the vote, I think.
Yeah.
James Shaw, you're not standing in Wellington Central, although I went to the Arrow Valley debate last week and you were popping up like a Brian Tamaki puppet.
Oh, I'm insulted.
Just up and down, up and down. I thought you were going to start. It was like I was thinking you were missing the bit of that electorate stuff,
yeah,
are you?
Yeah, I was. I mean, and I was there. I was cheerleading for Tamitha Paul, who's our candidate there, who's doing, spectacularly well. I'd actually been trying to persuade Grant to change his plans, and so that he and I could come and do the kind of Waldorf and Stadler, with a kind of bring our own water pistols type thing, because the Arrow Valley Meet the Candidates debate is, I think, and others may have other opinions, but I think it is the highlight of the political calendar in an election season, because it's truly it's political entertainment, and it's a very particular crowd of people who, and there's not a single undecided voter in the room, of course. So it's great fun.
It's very entertaining, the questions coming from the people who are literally outside on the tarmac out there. You're sort of going reasonably hard in Wellington Central with Tamitha Paul. You're going hard in Rongotai with Julianne Genter. Chloe Swarbrick looks like a comfortable favourite in Auckland Central, which was the big... We're not
taking any comfort. Like, we're going hard in all the electorate.
But so that's three that you're already going for. The why and what difference would it make to get to end up with, say, a couple of electorate seats?
It's important to remember that Tamitha is a seat only. So the only way to get the fantastic young wahine Māori into government is by her winning the electorate. Chloe's win last term, obviously, I think, opened up the gates, although many of us had already realised that Greens are growing up and it's past time for us to start seriously going for electorates. Julianne's making such an impact, she can actually take that one too. The amount of ground campaign that she has been able to inspire is bloody amazing. And so it's about showing that we have got ground campaign, we take electorates seriously, and we've got these fantastic candidates sitting in those places.
I think if you look at the work that Chloe's done as the electorate MP for Auckland Central over the course of the last 3 years, she's been able to serve the people of Auckland Central really, really well and highlight how the challenges in Auckland Central are where all of those things that we're facing around the country. So, issues of inequality and wealth extremes are very, very present here. Issues around urban design, resilience to the effects of climate change, the kind of quality of our public services, for example, the fire service and so on. You know, she's been able to kind of connect those sort of mega trends around the country to people's everyday experience, and that's then informed her work in Parliament to an enormous degree. And you know, if we end up with 2, 3 or more electorate seats as a result of this, that I think really does add to our stable. And I think those seats, the top seats in our in terms of a party vote, they're the areas with the highest Green support in the whole country. So I think we should be able to demonstrate that we can win those seats.
We're also the calibre. I mean, I'm Green Auntie. I mean, I love my children. The calibre of our candidates, Huhana Linden in the north, in Taitokedo, who is just known deeply and widely in that area, is making such incredible ground there as well. And so being able to get these incredible high-quality, high-calibre candidates, I'm really proud of, to be able to grab in people who are inspired by our leadership, vision and approach as a political party. I'm pretty stoked about that, Toby.
So you talked about your healthy polling, looking, pretty solid. Part of that is probably to do with the Labour Party's polling. But it does mean that even if you're in opposition, you'll have a healthy caucus.
Yeah.
If that happens, what about you guys? What are your futures? You've got a bit of generational change? Do you go pass the baton on? Do you say goodbye?
I'm very happy to swing back to that, Toby, but I am going to take some issue with it's just because of how Labour is doing.
I didn't say it's just because of Labour.
I know.
Partly, come on, let's be grown-ups. Of course
I understand
it's partly to do with
that, but we've worked really hard on putting up robust, visionary and achievable solutions for all of our policies, and our own mahi and research is showing us that it's actually that incredible hard work. Like, have you seen, for example, in the past couple of weeks or 3, the way that other parties' policies are being trashed, whether it's GST policies, whether it's so-called tax policies, and the experts coming out calling it trash, trash, trash. Now, you've had opposition talking about our policies to say they hate it purely because they're opposition. But have you seen our policies get trashed in that same way? We've worked really, really hard and campaigned to follow them up. And I just want to be clear that whether or not Labour were doing well or terribly, our visions and our ability to get that cut through in a pretty toxic political environment is something that I just want to stand up for,
Yeah, I think there have been. I think that may have historically been true, that, Greens benefited when Labour went down, and the reverse was also true. But actually, over the course of the last 2 terms that we've been in government together, you've actually seen both of our votes go up at the same time. And I think that, if you were to talk to Labour strategists, they're trying to win the middle, and swing people over from between kind of who might be considering between Labour and National. So I think it's entirely possible, and in fact it's entirely necessary for both the Greens and Labour's vote to go up.
And would you care to answer my question?
Yeah, I definitely. We are focused on being in government. That's the focus, that's the aim, that's what we've got to spend our energy on. And, I've personally been able to say that I commit term by term, and that's the only way I can do it. And I've been able to personally commit to that. But the focus is And because the planet and the people need it, they need a progressive government, especially the next one, because that is going to influence not just the next 10 years, but the next many generations of change that we need. So, you know,
so
that's what
you've committed to the next term.
I commit each term.
What about you, James Shaw?
Oh, I mean, at the beginning of the term. So you sort of see what happens.
Oh,
right?
I see. So you're not committing now to the next term.
Yeah, well, no, we've committed to being in government for the next term, right? So that's the commitment, and you can't afford in this job to kind of spend mental energy on alternate scenarios, right? Especially right now during an election campaign. The thing is that you know, as Marama said, that it's a hard job, right? So there's always part of your brain that's like, imagine if I wasn't doing this, imagine I was doing something else, right? But the privilege of being able to make a difference on the kind of big long-term challenges that are facing our people and our planet is so great that you don't voluntarily walk away from that, right? And we've been given an opportunity for whatever period of time to make the greatest difference we can, to play the hands that we're dealt with by the electorate as best we can. And I think we've done a good job of that. And that's what we're doing again right now.
Okay, one more loser talk question. Just one more. In 2009, I think it was Russell Norman and Jeanette Fitzsimons signed an MOU with John Key, who's the Prime Minister. Now that I'm not going to waste everyone's time by talking about a national green coalition, but is that something that it seemed like a healthy thing? That's something that you would entertain?
Well, it shows the longevity of green change, right? Because through those agreements with any political party, but with the Nats, yes, we were able to start the warmer home stuff, the toxic sites clean up. And it just shows that, yes, Greens can work on issues. We welcome all political parties to come to us to copy our homework, to work with us on the solutions because they're bloody good. And we've always been open to that.
The climate dividend that was announced.
I was going to say, don't get me started, but you just got me started.
Which is part of National's tax plan. And so it's obviously it's a bit of spin because it's not really a climate dividend.
It's entirely spin.
Tax cut. So you're furious about that?
I am furious.
What about the stuff that Labour has done? Like the in the bonfire, there was quite a lot of green stuff. You know, you said you were pissed off about that at the time. Chloe Swarbrick said it was a slap in the face. But even more recently, there was the raiding of the Climate Emergency Response Fund to the tune of $236 million. And Chris Hipkins and Grant Robertson didn't even have the courtesy to tell you about that before they told the rest of us. Do you feel as though you've been taken for granted, disrespected? Have they taken the piss a bit too?
Well, look, it's a function of the 2020 election result, right? In which Labour were handed an outright majority. And actually, in those circumstances, it was pretty generous of the.
But you're the climate change minister.
Yes. Yeah, and well, I mean, I did have words, I guess what we would say is that this just demonstrates why we need more Green MPs in the next Parliament and more Green ministers, and why we need to be sitting around the cabinet table. And we've been really explicit about that for the first time, I think, in our entire history. We're going into this election campaign saying, put us in cabinet, give us a stronger hand to play, because we are, ultimately, I think we've done a good job with the two governments that we've been given the last two terms, but our position has been limited by, in the first term, the presence of New Zealand First, and in the second term, by the fact that it was an outright majority government that didn't need our votes, and our positions are outside cabinet. And there are consequences of that. And so what we're saying is, if you actually really, really want, finally, proper action on climate change, and if you really, really want to ensure that, we kind of stave off the extinction of our native species, and if you actually want to end intergenerational poverty in this country, then make sure that the Greens are in cabinet with multiple ministers, because that is the way that we will be able to influence the government, and we won't have repeats of those sort of situations.
You did have more leverage in 2017.
We did.
And there was confidence in supply agreement, Marama, and part of that, I think I have the words right, was a pledge for an overhaul of the welfare system. We had the Welfare Expert Advisory Group, and there were a range of things. Do you think that an overhaul of the welfare system materialised?
No, not at all. We've been quite upfront about that. There are levers that we would have pulled, we would like to have the power to have pulled, that, for example, could actually end poverty. That's a political choice. You can choose to increase incomes. You can choose to redistribute wealth and to unlock the resources from the wealthy few, literally 311 families holding $85 billion, from the wealthy few to actually do the stuff that we need to get done. So no, there hasn't been an overhaul. There were some steps made. Good, ka pai. Things like matching income increases to just blimmin' CPI, to inflation, for example. Hello. So good, but the Greens have actually put up the plans in this election and last election where we could choose to end whānau poverty and children living in poverty. My goodness, this country has what we need. Those are the political choices that the Greens would make, and this is why we need a strong Green influence in the next government.
But it's just, that was in the agreement and it didn't happen. That was there. It was right there in the agreement. It manifestly didn't happen. I don't know. Where does that leave us?
Well, but some of that's to do with the specificity of what's in the agreement, right?
So that was language that can be interpreted, right?
Yeah, you can always interpret those. Yeah. Well, you have to be careful.
So are there, I guess the question is, having gone through some of those processes, it's all still relatively new beast, right? In 1996, would you go about some of those things differently? Do you think now, like if you could go port back to that time, would you have tried to add a bit more specificity to that language?
We're in the throes right now, because we are focused on being the strongest influence in the next government. We're in the throes right now of having a look at exactly that, the current and past agreement, working out what are the things we need to get over the line in the next whole term of government. And that's what we are focused on at the same time at the moment. So that's an important question. We are announcing our election priorities for a reason. And the manifesto that we announced at our AGM also forms a sort of look at what are some of the key levers, the key embedding systemic roots that we need to get down so that no matter what government, we have directed a path towards protecting climate, environment and our people. And that's this sort of agreement discussion for the next government that we are having a look at right now as a party.
So will the priorities be ranked sort of numerically? How does that work?
No, it's not. And what we do is we negotiate. You've got to look at the agreement in the round. Sure. Right, and which is one of the reasons why people will say, "Is this a bottom line? Is that a bottom line? Will you roll this?
I want to ask because it's at once one of the most tedious parts of MMP campaigns. Rulings out, bottom lines,
incredibly tedious.
But it's also not. It's non-trivial. It's non-trivial.
Yeah.
And I guess my question to you both would be, how do I ask that question
in a way that's fruitful?
Sort of because people deserve to know, right?
Sure.
But also people hear the current Prime Minister, the leader of the Labour Party, saying, I will go to my grave before I introduce a wealth tax.
Yeah.
So, we have this some element of realism and pragmatism. How do I ask you that question in a way that bears some fruit?
Probably just the way that you just have asked it. Because what we say in response is it's not up to the leaders of political parties to rule in or rule out either other political parties or policies or anything like that, because the electorate has to have their say. And you said, would there be anything that we would have done differently about the 2017 or 2020 agreements? Yes, of course, but they were largely written by the voters,
by the math,
right? Because exactly the way that the numbers stacked up. So you kind of those things have an inevitability to them as a result of whatever it is that the electorate themselves serve up. And that's why when we say, we need to look at an agreement in the round, because ultimately, of the big policy priorities that we've put out in this campaign and of the manifesto that we've published, our ability to get more or less of that will be determined by how many Green MPs we've got relative to other political parties, how many parties form the coalition, and so on. And so, as Marama and I keep saying until we're blue in the face.
You'd be very disciplined. You'd be very disciplined. I mean, I could recite the answer to you, but I kind of hear that, and it's. I mean, at once, of course, we know it works like that. But there is nothing in there. It's like you're explaining how a machine works, not what's in it. You know what I'm?
No, we can put some stuff in it, because it is a fair question, Toby, and we realise that. And I think our fair, truthful answer is, if people, the power is in the vote. If people want an income guarantee, if people want a wealth tax, if people want free dental for all, not just for some, if people want hoki whenua mai, they can vote for it. And people understanding their power, putting the power back into the hands of the voters, we think is a truthful response from us, because we will be guided and we will encourage people to vote for the things that they want to see. We will be honest and say the more support we get, the more chance of getting it over the line. No one can rule in or out. That power is not for politicians. That power is for voters.
And then when we take a draft agreement or a proposed agreement to our members, they will look at it and say, across the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the crisis of intergenerational poverty, is the package that's being presented to us sufficiently progressive for us to be able to vote for that, right? So, those are the kind of the three top priorities for us. And we do want to see an agreement that delivers on all three of those and delivers substantial progress because, we will be going into our third term. And as Marama said, we want to lock in systemic long-term changes that can survive multiple changes of government over generations.
Very, very quickly on process, how does it work? You negotiate an agreement and then you have an AGM or a special general meeting of some sort and everyone logs on all the members during it. So and then
delegates.
Delegates, right? Okay. And they have a bit of time to digest it, or how does it work? What is the practical?
It varies a little. Again, it sort of depends on what happens in the election, right? But in 2017, because of the presence of New Zealand First and the way that they were sort of conducting it, we had this. We were really constrained, and we sort of had to talk our delegates through it on the Zoom call and kind of show it to them live and kind of answer questions as we were going. We had a bit more time in 2020, so they kind of got it a couple of hours in advance, and sort of were able to answer questions that way. But ultimately, it's kind of pretty immediate to generally historically has been pretty immediate to the call where we get on to talk about it.
And on a practical level, not to dwell on this, but that's why the idea of a national green governing arrangement is kind of dead on arrival anyway, isn't it? If you were to put that,
it's hard to imagine the Green Party members.
It's not a starter. Let's talk about climate change.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's do that.
In 2017, I remember it well, in the Auckland Town Hall, Jacinda Ardern took to the stage and she said, climate change is the nuclear-free moment of our generation. I was thinking about that just before, and I was thinking, if the same level of application, focus, energy had been applied to nuclear-free moment as has been to climate change, would we have inter-islanders with nuclear reactors on them? What do you think? I mean, like, where are we on that? Where are we on that? And in terms of that, in terms of whether or not that rhetoric, also the climate emergency rhetoric, we don't know what happens in an emergency. If we have an emergency in the studio, we all get the fuck up and leave. It's we take sort of unusual extreme action. Where are we? How have we fared?
Yeah. Well. Not at that level. Not at that level. I think the key difference between the actual nuclear-free moment in the 1980s and today is that actually the nuclear-free decision was a much simpler thing to implement because all that had to happen was the government had to say, we will not allow nuclear-armed or powered ships into our ports. End of story. That moment has come and gone. Then we've just got to deal with, the fallout with ANZUS and, our traditional allies and blah, 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 blah. But that's, kind of like that was it.
From an implementation point of view.
Whereas, if you're talking about stopping climate change and building resilience to the kind of storms and floods and so on, you have to have a program of government in every part of the government from all of the different sectors, whether it's, transport, urban design, building and construction, waste, agriculture, forestry, innovation systems, finance, you name it. You've got to be doing stuff all over there. Plus, you've got to redesign your towns and your cities and your buildings to, kind of be resistant to the storms and so on, and stop building houses in dumb places and maybe move several tens of thousands of houses out of harm's way and all of that kind of stuff. So on all of those fronts, we have actually started to make some progress, but not at the speed or the scale that is necessary. And, people in this country are having now their kind of first set of lived experiences of the consequences of decades of inaction, right? So we're really clear about the need to pick up the scale and the speed, which is why, and I know it gets boring, we keep saying if you put us in cabinet with more Green MPs, we will be able to pick up that speed and that scale and to deliver on that promise.
But can I add to that, Toby, one of the dynamics when people are worried about where their next meal is coming from, when people are worried about where they're going to sleep tonight, it's really difficult for the broader population to get on board of all of the other things, including climate action.
Right.
And this is why ending poverty is a climate policy. This is why ending homelessness is a climate action policy. And we still get the odd question, they're dying out, but we still get the odd question from perhaps supporters and around the country, I thought you're supposed to be a Green Party. Why aren't you just focused on the environment and on the climate? All of our policies need to be understood as interconnected and interdependent, and not to mention the fact that our own Green Party charter and kaupapa is founded on social, environmental, climate justice. So this is one of the other challenges and I mention this because sometimes the polls can show cost of living right up the front, obviously, and perhaps some environment and climate a bit behind. And so we've got to understand what people are facing every single day and why we have to do all of it, not just some of it.
It's been interesting to me. I've been sort of wondering whether or not the kind of teal deal energy that we saw in the Australian election would manifest here. And has it not because of cost of living, or has it not because the National Party is different to the Liberal National Coalition in Australia? Or
no, I think I think part of it's because the electoral system in Australia is quite different, right? They've still got a first past the post system, and so the kind of the teal movement was set up to deliberately bleed votes off from the Liberal Party, who were hopeless on climate change, and there are lots of economically conservative but socially liberal and very environmentally concerned people living in the kind of leafy suburbs of kind of Sydney and Melbourne and so on and so forth, who were in seats that were otherwise kind of true blue seats, who they just said, actually, this government's rubbish on those things, and that movement doesn't exist in quite the same way here.
Also, can I add to the teal deal stuff? Because what I've often experienced is some of those questions, why aren't you just focused on the environment, are coming from people who actually don't believe in wealth redistribution, and they want to feel comfortable about we want to plant trees and not redistribute wealth. So I do want to call that up a little, because this idea of a teal deal is founded on not actually transforming the economy, which we need if we're going to take climate action. So I just want to call that up a little bit.
I get this a lot when I'm addressing business audiences, right?
Same.
and so I hear from these people who say, look, I'm generally a national supporter, but I'm really worried about climate change. Why don't you guys, we need you to kind of work with the National Party. And if you did that, you'd be in power forever. And, then we'd finally make some progress on climate change. And I say, okay, if we do that, will you change your vote? And they say, no, I'm going to vote for the National Party. I'm like, okay, well, and we know that our voters want us to support a Labour-led government because they will make more progress on biodiversity, on climate change, on ending inequality than they would if there was a national-led government. So you say, okay, so we're just going to say goodbye to pretty much 100% of our current voters and hello to who exactly? And so there's just nothing in it here. Quickly
on agriculture, because this comes up a fair bit, is the argument against bringing agriculture into the emissions trading scheme, or our farming sector is more efficient, more climate friendly than in much of the industrialised world. For every cow we remove from the herds in New Zealand, another cow will be doing it somewhere else and will have higher methane emissions than we do here. What's your answer to that?
Well, the total volume of pollution that we put into the atmosphere is important, right? So you can, because frankly, we have seen productivity gains in our agriculture sector where our emissions per cow, if you like, or per unit of production, whether that's milk or meat, have come down almost 1% a year, pretty much year on year for a long time. But we've it is, but we've just expanded the number of cows, right? So efficiency by itself doesn't solve the problem, because if you just, you get more and more efficient, but then you increase production, then actually what happens is the total volume of pollution goes up. On the other hand, if we kind of build on that success that we've had around efficiency and also work out a way to have a really productive farming sector that also reduces the total amount of pollution that goes into the atmosphere, that will be incredibly valuable, not just in terms of, adding value to our own products that we sell overseas, but also for the rest of the world, because we are not the only country with cows. There are lots of countries that have got cows and a lot more cows than we've got. And everybody is up against this. So if you look, the Netherlands at the moment are just limiting cow numbers. They're literally paying farmers to destock right now. Ireland are looking at kind of installing methane detectors kind of out in the country to kind of, try and build some real data there so that they can sort of work out how to reduce their emissions in total. The European Union has said that, if we don't make progress on our agricultural emissions as well as on, carbon dioxide on the industrial side of the economy, then we will face trade tariffs under the new EU trade deal that we've got with them. This is very, very real. And the fact is that because we actually do have some success in the farming sector that we can build on, it shouldn't be nearly as scary as if we're just starting from scratch, because we've got a sector there that is incredibly innovative, and you've got farmers all up the country doing amazing work. And if we could just get everybody to do as well as those best farmers, we'd be halfway there.
And even if it were true, and it clearly is not, as James has just outlined, even if it were true that other sectors, other countries are still a bit shit, that's not the vision for Aotearoa. We are leaders. We are doers. We won't just sit here and say as a country, let's just stay being shit because everyone else is. That's not us.
Less shit than other countries.
Yeah.
Aotearoa New Zealand. Yeah,
that's never been us. And so and as James said, we have got examples now. We've got stories to build on. Let's do that.
What were your true thoughts and feelings watching Todd Muller's valedictory speech?
Well, Todd's a friend, and he became a friend.
We spent a lot of hours together, right?
We did spend a lot of hours together, and he and I come from very different walks of life and very different, political and cultural traditions, if you like. But it was, for me, the work that we did together was actually politics at its finest, because it was when we said, for the long-term good of the country, we recognise that actually we need to do something that's going to be enduring, that will, survive changes of government across generations. And he's got an integrity to him, and an appreciation of those kind of deep and kind of subtle shifts in our society that are taking place and that need to take place. So I think he's a loss to Parliament. I think he's a loss to the National Party, and he's a thoroughly decent human being.
He's a good human, and it was really refreshing to see him lift himself above politics in his valedictory and make really clear references towards aspirational tiriti justice sort of undertones, towards saying, look, actually climate, we all need to do better. That's where all political parties should be landing. It was really refreshing, not wholly surprising, because he's been a different flavour. That's been quite obvious.
So where's the Todd Muller and the National Party if the polls are right and it's national government? Who's the Todd Muller and the?
It's not obvious.
No,
it's not obvious. You've got to remember that it's quite an inexperienced group there at the moment. They're quite new. There aren't a lot of old hands around, and for example, Simon Watts, who's their current climate change spokesperson, has only had that job for about 3 months, and so we haven't really had an opportunity to get a sense of that.
Can I just totally change the subject briefly? Because I know you guys have you need to get out there and make some more attack ads with your opponents. Can I just briefly sidebar, Marama, on the, what's her name? The Posie Parker counter-protest that you attended, and there was that moment where you were standing on a crossing and a handle of motorbike swiped your midriff, and it appeared to be a group of motorcycles linked to Brian Tamaki's movement. Where are we on that? Is there a police investigation still underway, or is that Paul?
Only because it's out in public already am I able to confirm at a very high level, because otherwise, I can't muck up police investigations, of course. But what is already out in public is that a person associated with Destiny Church has been confirmed, has been identified.
Right.
I did make an official statement that's already out in public as well. And the next steps aren't in public yet, so I'll allow that conversation to take place in the right way. But I think what's important here, Toby, is I'm mostly just wanting to highlight that there have been different people at the front line of targeting and sort of hate campaigns over, centuries. At the moment, trans people, rainbow people are the current bunch who are being exploited. These are people who have been discriminated, oppressed, systemically and violently abused. These are people who actually are disproportionately impacted by family violence, sexual violence, with the least power, the least resource, the least voice. And the fact that we have got political players exploiting them to build hate for some clicks and for some votes is quite abhorrent to me. And, the Greens will always stand for those very groups of people who get systemically and daily abused and targeted, and that's a really proud part of the Green Party legacy.
And this individual, Posie Parker, I always get her name wrong, is, looking to return in September, apparently, to fan some of those flames of anger and hatred again. What is just from a tactical standpoint, really, what do we do? What is the solution? Is the solution a ban? Is the solution a counter protest, or is the solution just to give it no oxygen and to ignore her?
Those are fair questions and ones I've been thinking about. So it's important for all listeners to understand that she is actually required as part of the judicial process to be present, and so that's something that's the understanding.
The judicial process,
the justice process in terms of giving evidence.
I see.
And so I need to...
Not in your case.
No, sorry, for while she's coming back. And so I need to be clear, and that's the advice that has been given to me, that there is a requirement for her in a process. In terms of tactics and strategy, actually the communities are showing us. So it's a measure of... it's trying to not amplify and oxygenate the hate, but raising up the positive values, the care for community, the broad intersection of groups who have turned up to say trans a taonga. We had unions, we had teachers, we had Black Lives Matter, we had tangata whenua and tino rangatiratanga groups. We had nurses and health workers turning up to say we reject this hate as a country. Aotearoa will not give in to this international gross campaign that is ugly. We are not your country to exploit, and we are here to say trans a taonga. And so that's the sort of tactical strategy that communities have already been showing us. And you could probably parallel it with the anti-co-governance tours, where we have had, yes, there have been sort of counter-protests, but mostly you've had tauiwi, tangata whenua, Māori, people of all backgrounds turning up to say, your kōrero is kaka. What we are about is the positive inspiration that Te Reti Justice has for all of us.
Thank you. Last thing, another vision I have of you two. I was saying to you before in the German debate, you look like you're having a genuinely jolly time. Well done. The other time I think of in recent times in the House is when you were both there for Elizabeth Kerekere's speech. And I'm interested to know, first, why you felt you needed to be there, and also what was going through your minds when she talked of, I think, an epic failure of leadership. Can you take us back to that moment in the House?
Yeah, we can. We continue to hold our heads up on what happened. We're also not wanting to relitigate details and circumstances. She was always going to say whatever she needed to say, and that's over to her. We felt it was important to front and be there. And hearing those things, well, we've been very clear. There is a lot that has been said by Dr. Kerekere that we simply do not agree with, that we do not believe is truthful at all. And we've made that clear right from the start. Our priority has always been about our responsibilities as co-leaders to collective staff and MP wellbeing and safety, and that's what we continue to uphold. And so, we wanted to be in the House, to be there, to be present, and to be able to, I think, important for our staff and our caucus to see us being there as well. So that was important.
Last thing. It's been the fair bit of coalition of chaos rhetoric around. What's your answer to that when you make your case for having a third term? And also, as part of that, I'm interested to know how your relations are with Te Pāti Māori.
Well, first of all, if you look at the alternative of a National Act New Zealand First coalition, talk to me about chaos, right? I mean, that is a truly chaotic proposition right there. If you look back at our track record now on 2 terms of government, we have been, I think, a very stable and responsible government partner who have played the hand that we've been dealt with at the electorate as best we can in the circumstances that we found ourselves. And we have pushed Labour to go further than they otherwise would have gone, right? So I think when you look at us, when you look at Labour and Greens working together, it is a very, very constructive working relationship. And of course, we don't agree on everything. I mean, no two parties do. In fact, most political parties don't even agree with themselves on half the time. So, and we've been very transparent about that, and we built that into our agreements. We said, look, on this one, we disagree with where Labour's chosen to go. If we had more votes, we might have been able to swing it and so on. People are like, no, that seems reasonable. So I just reject it. I just think it's an absolutely nonsense. There's no reality that they can point to that says that we are a coalition of chaos. I think that we've been a really good government who's dealt with some enormous challenges over the course of the 6 years that we've been in government. Our relationship with Te Pāti Māori is also constructive. We obviously think alike on a lot of matters, and we'd be very happy to work with them if they find themselves in a position where they are able to choose to become part of a government or not, and they may not, because, and if you look at our own history, Rod and Jeanette and that caucus in 1999 chose not to go into government when they could have, because they were just in, they had, 4 new MPs and 2 returning MPs. They'd only just scraped in on the specials, and they said, well, actually, for the kind of the long term, we need to spend this term kind of consolidation building and so on. So it's not clear cut whether they would want to become whether Te Pāti Māori would want to become part of a government or not. They may choose not to. That might strategically be the better choice for them. But that's really for them to answer, not for us. I
think it's funny when we think about who's chaotic. What are we up to? The 4th ACT candidate who has had to resign because of just straight up kooky. And I think it's really clear that actually Greens and Labour have been able to both get stuff across the line, ka pai, but also our independent political positions as the Green Party are actually why our polling over 2 terms in a government arrangement has now defied political history twice, which is that a smaller government, a smaller party in a government arrangement just goes blech, and we've seen that, right? And so I'm really proud that we've been able to hold our own stuff, who we are, and also get stuff done.
Marama, Davidson, James Shaw, thank you so much.
Kia ora, Toby. Thank you.